as I, Jimmy, stepped onto the cavernous hold of the cargo plane. A sense of the familiar mixed with the unknown enveloped me. It was another mission transporting rare animals from East Asia, a task I had grown accustomed to. Yet each flight bore its own unique story. The animals, caged yet regal in their confinement, filled the space with a sense of life that belied their captivity. I moved among them with a practiced ease, ensuring their comfort, my routine punctuated by the occasional snarl or chirp. The crew was a patchwork of experience and novelty. The pilots, Captain Thompson and First Officer Lee, were like two pieces of a puzzle not yet fitting perfectly, skilled but still learning each other's rhythms. We had a flight service engineer, Mike, whose hands spoke of years of toil on machines, and a flight attendant, Sarah, whose smile was a welcome relief amidst the metallic coldness of the plane. Then there were my fellow escorts, each a guardian in their own right. There was the stoic Mark, a veteran in animal transportation, his gaze always steady. The jovial Carlos, whose laughter filled the air, a stark contrast to the silence of our cargo. And the newcomer, Aida, a veterinarian. Aida, hailing from East Asia, had eyes that seemed to understand the unspoken language of the animals. Her presence was both a mystery and a comfort. As the engines hummed to life, I found myself performing my duties almost mechanically, feeding the animals, checking their cages, ensuring their safety. These actions had become a part of me, as natural as breathing. But there was more to this journey than the physical tasks. I watched Ida, her hands gentle yet firm, her voice soothing yet authoritative as she tended to the animals. There was a grace in her movements, a story in her silence. Our conversations were sparse, filled more with the exchange of glances and nods than words. Yet, in those moments, a connection was forming, a bond over our shared responsibility. She was an enigma, a reminder of the diverse tapestry of life and experiences that converged in this flying hangar. We ate in silence, the hum of the engines a constant companion. Evenings were spent in solitude, each lost in their thoughts, the vastness of the skies outside a mirror to our introspection. I often found myself opening crates, checking supplies, my hands moving with a precision born of practice. These moments of mundane activity were a comfort, a reminder that life, even in the extraordinary circumstances of a cargo plane transporting rare animals, was grounded in the simple acts of living. As the journey continued, I watched the landscape change beneath us, a tapestry of earth and water, of civilization and wilderness. The hold of the large cargo plane was a menagerie in flight, each cage a window to a different corner of the wild. The bear, its presence impossible to ignore, let out intermittent roars that vibrated through the air. The family of foxes, huddled together, watched us with keen, calculating eyes. The mountain eagle, perched stoically, seemed to hold its own against the rumble of the engines. The wolves and tigers, each in their enclosures, exuded a raw, untamed power. Amidst this wild assembly, Aida, the new veterinarian from East Asia, moved with a grace that seemed to calm even the most restless of our charges. Her presence, new to the team, brought a fresh perspective and a gentle strength. Our interactions, initially professional and focused on the well-being of the animals, gradually took on a lighter tone. Her smile, her jokes, they brought a human touch to the stark environment of the cargo hold. I found myself drawn to her, curious about her story, and eager to bridge the gap between professional camaraderie and personal connection. Yet, amidst the routine of animal care and the developing dynamics of our crew, there was an element of mystery that persisted. A completely sealed crate cage. This container, unlike the others, offered no glimpse of its occupant. Mr. Mark, the senior escort, was the only one who tended to this hidden charge. His actions were methodical and private, feeding and caring for the unseen animal within. The rest of us, including Carlos, were left to our imaginations about what creature required such secrecy. The flight, charted over several days with a scheduled refueling stop, was progressing smoothly until an unforeseen incident jolted us from our routine. The cage of the foxes, somehow, had been left unsecured, and in a moment of collective lapse, the cunning animals had escaped into the hold. The calm of our journey was broken as the foxes, quick and elusive, turned the cargo space into a labyrinth of hide and seek. Mr. Mark, taking immediate command, directed our efforts to recapture them. Aida, surprisingly adept in the crisis, joined Carlos and me in the effort. Her calm demeanor and quick thinking were invaluable in the chaos. The task was daunting, requiring a delicate balance of urgency and care to avoid harming the foxes or causing further disruption. Working alongside Ada, I felt a bond forming, forged in the heat of the moment. Her quick smiles amidst the tension, her focused eyes, they spoke of a depth of character that went beyond her role as a veterinarian. As I delved deeper into the cargo hold, the hunt for the escaped foxes morphed from a frantic scramble into a methodical search. The dim lighting cast long shadows among the crates, turning familiar shapes into looming specters. The hum of the aircraft's engines, a constant backdrop to our lives in the air, seemed to grow more ominous with each passing moment. Ida was close by, her presence a silent comfort amidst the growing unease. It was then that Mark, our senior specialist, stumbled upon a discovery so gruesome, it chilled the very air we breathed. Hidden among the crates, almost merging with the shadows, was a body, a man, or what remained of him. His head was missing, and his chest. It looked as if his heart had been violently ripped out. A cold dread crept over me, the kind that clutches at your soul and refuses to let go. The man was a stranger, not listed among those who boarded the plane. Questions swirled in my mind, each more unsettling than the last. How had he come to be on our flight? Who was he? And most horrifyingly, who or what could have done this to him? Panic spread like wildfire among the crew and escorts. The decision was made swiftly. We needed to land at the nearest airport, to alert the authorities, to escape this creeping terror. As discussions erupted among the senior specialists and the airplane crew, I returned to my duties, a feeble attempt to cling to normalcy. But the ordinary had abandoned us. Approaching the row of cages to feed the animals, my heart skipped a beat. The completely locked crate cage, the one that had held an unknown, possibly dangerous animal, was open, empty. A surge of fear gripped me, an icy hand squeezing my chest. I rushed to Mark, my words tumbling out in a panicked blur. His reaction was one of pure terror. The color drained from his face, his eyes wide with a fear that sent shivers down my spine. He demanded, with a voice edged with desperation, that the plane be landed immediately, anywhere suitable. The atmosphere in the cargo hold had shifted irrevocably. The unknown creature that had escaped from the crate was out there, somewhere in the plane, a silent threat lurking in the shadows. Mark's actions were swift and decisive, a stark contrast to the thick fog of uncertainty that had settled over us. In a matter of moments, he had gathered the attendants, the flight engineer, myself, and even Sarah, the flight attendant. His movements were brisk, his face etched with a seriousness that brooked no argument. He began distributing shotguns, the heavy metal of the firearms cold and alien in my hands. "Monster," he said simply when I pressed him for answers. The word hung in the air, heavy with implications I couldn't begin to comprehend. "If you see it, you won't need me to tell you what it is. Shoot on sight." His instructions were clear, yet they left a chasm of unanswered questions. What kind of monster had been lurking in that sealed crate? Why hadn't we been informed? The uncertainty gnawed at me, but there was no time for hesitation. Mark's urgency was infectious. We were a team, albeit an unprepared and frightened one, thrown together by circumstances beyond our comprehension. The gravity of our situation was palpable, a tangible force that bound us together as the plane descended towards an unscheduled landing. Then came the realization that Aida was missing. She hadn't responded to her radio, and no one had seen her for over an hour. Panic, already a constant companion, spiked. Aida, with her gentle strength and quiet confidence, had become more than just a colleague. She was a friend, someone I had come to admire. I volunteered to search for her, driven by a mix of concern and an unspoken bond that had formed between us. Mark, though reluctant, had no choice but to agree. We split into groups, a decision that fractured our fragile unity, sending us into the dimly lit corridors of the plane, armed and fearful. The search for Ada was a journey through a landscape transformed. The familiar confines of the cargo plane had become a labyrinth of shadows and uncertainty. Each creak of the aircraft's structure was a potential harbinger of danger. The soft hum of the engines, once a comforting sign of normalcy, now seemed like a distant, unattainable peace. Our group moved cautiously, the weight of the shotguns a constant reminder of the potential threat that lurked among us. The tension was a tangible thing, a heavy cloak that stifled conversation and heightened our senses. Every shadow, every unexpected noise sent jolts of adrenaline coursing through me. As we progressed, the reality of our situation weighed heavily on my mind. The sealed crate, the gruesome discovery of the headless, heartless body, the missing Ida, each element added a layer of horror to our predicament. I called out for Ida, my voice echoing in the empty spaces of the aircraft. There was no response, just the hollow sound of my own voice bouncing back at me, a mocking reminder of our isolation. The search continued, each step taking us deeper into the unknown. Our search through the plane, Mark and I, was a cautious, tense journey. Each step was deliberate, each breath measured. The shotgun felt heavy in my hands, a burden of responsibility I had never imagined bearing. The silence around us was oppressive, broken only by the distant hum of the aircraft's engines and the occasional creak of its frame. It was a sound that, under different circumstances, would have been a mere background noise, but now each creak seemed ominous, a potential signal of hidden dangers. The whisper that reached our ears was like a lifeline in the murky waters of fear and uncertainty. Exchanging a look with Mark, we moved towards the sound, each step heavy with the weight of what we might find. The narrow corridor leading into the dark depths of the cargo bay seemed to stretch into infinity, a path leading into the unknown. There, in a shadowed corner, we found Aida. Her presence was both a relief and a new knot of worry. She sat, clutching her medical case, her face etched with worry and fear. Relief flashed across her face as she saw us, a momentary break in the storm of emotions that surrounded us. Mark's voice, tense with concern, broke the silence. "What's going on here?" His eyes, dark and intense, sought answers in Aida's face. Her response, a tale of strange noises and a glimpse of something monstrous, added layers to the mystery and terror that enveloped us. She spoke of a creature covered in fur, a fleeting shadow that disappeared into the darkness, prompting her to hide. The decision to return to the cabin was made swiftly, a strategic retreat in the face of an unknown and dangerous adversary. But our plans were shattered as suddenly as they were made. The creature, a monstrous embodiment of our darkest fears, emerged from the darkness. Its fur was black as the night, its eyes glinted ominously, and its claws, they were the stuff of nightmares. Mark's command to shoot was a reflex, an instinctive response to the immediate threat, but our efforts were in vain. The creature moved with a terrifying agility, dodging our desperate shots. In a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, it leaped, its deadly claws finding their mark. Mark's screams tore through the air, a sound that would haunt my dreams for years to come. The horror of the moment was paralyzing, but Ada's presence, her hand gripping mine, pulled me back to reality. We retreated, the sounds of the creature and Mark's agony fading into the background, swallowed by the relentless noise of the engines. As we made our way to the safety of the other side of the plane, the animal cages cast an eerie light, their inhabitants silent witnesses to the unfolding nightmare. As Ida and I stumbled into the relative safety where the other crew members were gathered, the weight of the horrors we had witnessed hung heavily upon us. "We lost Mark," I managed to say, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. My voice, a shaky whisper, told of the monster's attack, a tale so nightmarish it seemed unreal even as I recounted it. The faces around me were etched with fear, a stark reminder that we were trapped in the sky, far from any haven. The sense of vulnerability was palpable, a tangible presence that clung to us like a shroud. The engineer, a man of practicality and logic, voiced what we were all thinking. We must find a safe place. The cockpit, with its reinforced door and limited access, seemed our best hope. We moved as a unit, a band of survivors bound by a shared terror. Each step was cautious, each shadow a potential hiding place for the beast that stalked us. Our progress was a journey through a landscape transformed by fear. The The familiar contours of the airplane were now alien and menacing. Then, without warning, the creature struck again. It emerged from the shadows like a specter, its form cloaked in darkness. Its claws, glistening in the dim light, were instruments of death. The flight attendant's scream, a piercing sound of pure terror, shattered the tense silence. We fought back, our rifles a feeble defense against the swift brutality of the monster. It moved with a terrifying agility, its strength overwhelming. The struggle was brief and fierce, a chaotic dance of survival and horror. And then, silence. The aftermath was a scene from a nightmare. The flight attendant, her body covered in blood, lay still and lifeless. Carlos was also lying on the floor unmoving, his struggle over. The monster had vanished, leaving behind a trail of blood and an oppressive silence that weighed heavily upon us. I grabbed Ida's arm, urgency lending strength to my voice. We need to get out of here before that monster comes back, a desperate plan forming in my mind. We moved into the darkness of the plane, a shadowy realm that offered both concealment and danger. Our escape was a frantic rush through the corridors, a flight from the horror that lurked behind us. Each step was a leap of faith, a hope against hope that we would find a way out of this nightmare. The darkness around us was a cloak, hiding us from the creature, but also obscuring our path to safety. The silence that enveloped us was a stark contrast to the chaos that had reigned moments before. It was a silence that spoke of death, of lives brutally ended. Our hearts pounded in our chests, a frenzied rhythm that matched our hurried steps. Aida and I moved with a haste born of fear, our breaths ragged and uneven, competing with the pounding of our hearts. The echoes of the horrific battle we had fled seemed to reverberate within us, leaving an oppressive silence in their wake. Finding a momentary shelter, I paused, trying to gather my thoughts amidst the chaos. It dawned on me how isolated we were. The pilot sequestered in the cockpit, possibly an engineer somewhere in the bowels of the plane, and us. My radio, lost in the frantic escape, had cut off our only means of communication. We were alone, with a treacherous expanse between us and safety. "We can't stay here," I whispered to Ada, my voice barely audible. "We need to get to the cockpit. But something, that thing, it's out there." The words hung heavily in the air, a tangible expression of the peril that loomed over us. Aida's nod was resolute, her face a blend of fear and determination. The realization of our situation was clear in her eyes. We were pawns in a deadly game, a struggle for survival against an unfathomable foe. A plan began to form in my mind, born of desperation and a flicker of hope. Perhaps the engineer, if he was still alive, could help us. His knowledge of the plane might be our key to escaping this nightmare. We decided to retrace our steps, to venture back through the mangled corridor where the creature had attacked. With each step into the darkness, my anxiety mounted. The shadows seemed alive, moving and shifting in the corner of my vision. Every creak and groan of the aircraft was a potential harbinger of doom. Then, without warning, it appeared. The monster, a creature of nightmares, rushed out of the darkness. Ida and I pressed ourselves into the shadows, our breaths held, our bodies rigid with fear. The monster paused, its head tilting as it sniffed the air. It turned towards us, its eyes seeming to pierce the darkness, and for a moment I thought we were discovered. But then, a noise elsewhere in the cargo hold distracted it. The creature's head snapped toward the sound, and with a grace that belied its size, it moved off towards the source of the disturbance. We waited, our hearts pounding in our ears, until the sound of its movement faded. Releasing the breath I hadn't realized I was holding, I looked at Ada. "Now," I whispered, urgency lending speed to our movements. We made our way towards the cockpit, our steps cautious but swift. The journey was a maze of fear and shadows, each turn a potential encounter with death. The dim emergency lights cast eerie patterns on the walls, transforming the familiar into the surreal. Reaching the cockpit door, we paused. It was a moment of respite, a brief interlude in the nightmare that had enveloped us. But it was also a moment of decision, a threshold between the relative safety we had found and the unknown dangers that lay ahead. Entering, we were met with a scene that upended the last vestiges of normalcy. One pilot sat rigidly at the helm, his back to us, while the other lay crumpled on the floor, a pool of blood painting a gruesome picture. My eyes fixed on the lifeless form of the pilot, my mind struggling to piece together the fragments of this horrifying puzzle. I turned to the surviving pilot, questions tumbling from my lips, but the words died in my throat. A noise behind us. The sound of impending doom drew our attention. The creature, the monster from the depths of nightmare, stood there, its hands clutching the mangled remains of the engineer. Aida's reaction was the cruelest twist of the knife. Instead of fear, she smiled, welcoming the beast. She approached it, her movements gentle, a grotesque parody of tenderness. The monster responded in kind, its nuzzling a surreal display of affection. My world spun, reality splintering into shards of disbelief and horror. The pilot's voice, cold and detached, floated to my ears. "So what are we going to do with you, Jimmy?" The monster growled, a sound that seemed to vibrate through my very soul and started advancing towards me. I fell to my knees, the shock anchoring me to the spot. The realization crashed over me like a tidal wave. Aida, the pilot, the monster, they were together in this. I was trapped, a lone figure against a conspiracy of darkness. Then, in a moment that defied all logic, Aida stepped between the monster and me. Her voice, calm and decisive, addressed the beast. "I liked him, Father. Let's leave him alone. No one will believe him anyway." She turned to the pilot, her suggestion chilling. "I think he can be locked in a cage." My mind reeled, grappling with the unfolding betrayal. Aida's smile, once a source of comfort, now twisted into a sinister curve. The pilot moved with a purpose, the shotgun in his hand, an instrument of finality. A hard blow to my head sent stars exploding across my vision. The last image seared into my consciousness was Aida's smiling face, a portrait of betrayal, and the shotgun descending towards me. Waking up, my first sensation was the throbbing pain in my head, a pulsating drumbeat that anchored me back to a grim reality. My eyes fluttered open, the blurred world slowly coming into focus. I was in a cage, my body lying on a hard, unforgiving surface. The cargo hold of the airplane, once familiar, now seemed like a foreign landscape. Men in military uniforms were moving around, their voices a chorus of an unfamiliar language. They approached my cage, their words unintelligible, their expressions a mix of curiosity and concern. I tried to rise, but my body rebelled, weakness and pain conspiring to keep me grounded. The men's voices grew louder, their questions a volley I couldn't answer. My attempts to explain, to convey the horrors of what had transpired, were lost in the chasm of language. Scattered around me in the cage were syringes and packets of sleeping pills, evidence of the chemical cocktail that had led to my incapacitated state. The realization brought a wave of nausea, a physical manifestation of the betrayal and horror that had led me here. Eventually, I was lifted onto a stretcher, a transition from the cage that was both a physical and symbolic release. Yet, as I was carried out of the plane, the relief was tempered by the sight that greeted me. The plane had landed in a wide clearing, a secluded nook amidst dense trees and towering mountains. The isolation of the location was palpable, a stark reminder of our vulnerability in the face of the unknown. As I was carried away, glimpses of the plane's interior revealed the grim aftermath of our ordeal. The bodies of the crew, lifeless and still, were being removed. The caged animals, silent witnesses to the nightmare, were a jarring juxtaposition to the human tragedy. The news that 2 crew members were missing was a final twist, a lingering question mark at the end of a tale of horror and mystery. Their fate, unknown and perhaps unknowable, added a haunting layer to the events that had unfolded. As the stretcher moved further away from the plane, the forest around us seemed to close in, a natural barrier that separated us from the rest of the world. I was left to wonder, to try to make sense of the senseless, as the shadows of the trees lengthened and the mountains stood as silent sentinels to the horrors that had occurred.